When I was in seminary, my classmate Brian produced possibly the most singular study guide that I have ever seen. It was called Brian's Chart o' Heresies. And on it, Brian had assembled all the heresies that he could think of from across church history. I still have it on my hard drive, and I refer to it periodically when I need to know about heretical things, and also when I just want to remember Brian, because I somehow adore the idea that someone would create a document like this. It's a fun way of remembering him. In the Episcopal Church in Grace Memorial, we don't talk about heresy all that often. And I don't know if that's because it sort of seems to us like heresy is an antiquated or silly notion, or if it's because we live in a super individualistic time, and the idea of wrong belief that is contrary to orthodoxy, necessitates there's right belief, and we don't like being told how to think or how to believe. Or maybe it is because we remember the disastrous history, the awful history of the church, the evil history, those times when the church has responded to folks who have proclaimed things that the church reckoned was heresy with violence. We know so many examples of torture, of burning at the stake, appalling, that the church got from following someone who was murdered for saying and doing the wrong things to murdering people for saying and doing the wrong things. Whatever the objection may be, I want to suggest that the notion of the heresies that the church has identified that are found in Brian's document remain useful. It remains useful that the church has, across time, said there's certain ways of thinking about God that are mistaken. We ought not to think about God in that way. That's not to say that the church's violence was ever okay. Actually, I want to suggest that perhaps the greatest heresy of them all is the notion that violence is ever a reasonable response to the gospel. It's not to say that. It is to say that occasionally the councils of the church, when they said, this is a mistake, were correct in saying that a given thing was a mistake. An example that pops into mind from Brian's chart is the heresy called Marcionism. And Marcionism is the heresy whereby there are two gods recorded in the Bible, one a lesser God in the Old Testament, and a new and improved God who is found in the New Testament. This is problematic at least a couple of levels. The first is if you are a subscriber to Marcionism, you inevitably end up completely misunderstanding Jesus. Because the Old Testament is the foundation on which Jesus is standing. We've talked several times over the last number of weeks about annotated Bibles, a Bible that has a bunch of footnotes in it, and what you will find if you read a Bible with footnotes is Jesus, the things he says and does, are constantly referring back to the Old Testament. This is the Bible. The Old Testament is the Bible in entirety. As Jesus knows it, the God whom he calls Father is found in the Old Testament. So we are, to attempt to reject or minimize the Old Testament is necessarily to reject or minimize Jesus. Besides, Marcionism is a quarter inch away from anti-Semitism. Because if the Jewish folks had this sort of second-rate God and then Christians came along with the real deal, there's some awful things that can lead us into. And throw into the mix, as the Jewish New Testament scholar Amy Jill Levine has said, the argument, so you hear people confess Marcionism when they say things like, I believe in the good God of the New Testament, not the bad God of the Old. And Amy Jill Levine points out we can so easily reverse this. I believe in the good God who is my shepherd, Psalm 23, Not the bad God who throws people wailing and gnashing of teeth into the outer darkness, Matthew 8:23 and 25, right? You can play this game both directions, and it's equally unprofitable. The heresy that I'm wondering about on this Palm and Passion Sunday is another one from Brian's list. It's called Docetism. And my thesis is Docetism is probably the most common heresy in Western Christianity, in American Christianity right now. Does anyone know what Docetism is? Oh my goodness, Corbett does? And oh, John's shaking his, of course Corbett does. I could have known. So okay, there's one person here who knows. So Docetism is the heresy whereby Jesus didn't really become human, or fully human. He just appeared to become fully human. So humanity was sort of this costume that Jesus put on, a bit like Superman becomes Clark Kent. But all the time that Superman is Clark Kent, he continues to be invulnerable, he continues to be able to fly, he continues to have, does Superman have X-ray vision? I think. He continues to have all of these powers that Superman has. And in the docetistic view of Jesus, it's the same deal. Jesus doesn't really become a baby. He doesn't really have the wonder and the embarrassment of having a body. He doesn't really ever get sick or get hurt. He doesn't actually get crucified. He just appears to. And Docetism is, I want to suggest, a sneaky heresy because, well, for at least two reasons. The first is that it solves a problem for us, which is Docetism turns Good Friday into no big deal. So if you take Good Friday seriously, it's immensely distressing. Jesus is tortured and murdered. He is betrayed and abandoned. And a lot of us struggle to sit with that. I've often noticed, we're going to read the Passion reading later. I have, over the years, multiple times watched people reading the Passion reading begin to weep as we approach Golgotha. Like, I get it. I get it. This is immensely distressing. And I have heard people say, I can't live with the idea that Jesus was tortured and murdered. Docetism solves your problem. He wasn't tortured and murdered. He just appeared to be. And in that scenario, the villains they think they're winning. They think they've got Jesus dying on the cross, but Jesus is really somewhere at a remove, giggling about the whole thing. And I guess that's appealing, except it robs us, to my mind, of one of the great consolations of Christianity, which is the capacity to say to Jesus, when we suffer, you know what this is like. You've experienced this. You have experienced betrayal. You have experienced pain. You've experienced having a body. You've experienced the worst kind of death. There is no suffering that I can endure that you can't understand. And the docetistic Christ cannot understand at all because he just watched that stuff and never participated in it. The other way that this is a sneaky heresy is that it shows up disguised as reverence. And I think this is the reason why it is so dominant in Western Christianity, in American Christianity. When you go online on Twitter and you hear a very earnest Christian saying things like, Jesus never had a doubt, he never experienced anything like depression, you are hearing someone who understands themselves as being really reverent, but they are accidentally confessing docetism in this moment. Because for Jesus to never have a doubt, for him never to be depressed, he's not fully human. He's once again a God just kind of floating through life. Over the years, I've noticed that some of the biggest heat I've gotten for things that I've written or said has come from not being docetistic. So several Christmases ago, it was not here at Grace, back at St. John's, I talked about the miracle of the Incarnation and the amazing trust that God puts in human beings, that God is willing to become a baby and rely on human beings in order to live. Babies are entirely dependent on grown-ups to be fed, to be cared for, to have their diapers changed. If you have ever navigated a barfy baby in the middle of the night, you know how much is involved in cleaning up. And God allowed human beings to have that amazing role of trust. Anyway, I said something like that, and someone cornered me afterwards and said, oh, I don't think Jesus was ever a barfy baby. He was without sin, right? So you have this, this picture of Jesus who appears to be a baby, but isn't really a baby. Even when Jesus is small, what he really is a miniature monk. He's a grown-up, and not only is he a grown-up, he's a grown-up with the greatest immune system that humanity has ever seen and the greatest gastrointestinal system that humanity has ever seen. It only ever goes the correct direction, right? It's not fully human in this scenario, disguised as reverence. Today is Palm and Passion Sunday. And if you've been hanging around church for a while, you will perhaps remember that there was a time when these were two different Sundays. So up until maybe the mid-20th century, perhaps later, depending on which tradition you're in, Passion Sunday fell a week ago, and then today was Palm Sunday with what's called the liturgical renewal inspired by the Second Vatican Council in the 60s and beyond. These days merge into Palm and Passion Sunday. Interestingly, there's scholars who reckon that this is a return to ancient practice, that in the very early church, Palm and Passion Sunday would have been the same day. Regardless of whether this is Palm and Passion being together is a new innovation or whether it's a return to something ancient, there's no shortage of folks willing to tell you that it's a mistake for Palm and Passion to fall on the same Sunday, that they just don't belong together. There's an oil and water element to them. I will show my cards and say I don't agree at all. I think there's actually genius in the liturgical calendar, genius in what the church has done in putting Palm and Passion on a single day. In years gone by, I have argued that the genius flowed out of the dissonance of Palm and Passion being together, that they're kind of like two notes on the piano that you don't think belong together, but when you listen to them together, it's surprisingly beautiful. This is often where new and wondrous music has been created. I'm not going to argue that today. I'll send you that sermon if you want. What I'm going to argue today instead is actually that Palm and Passion are deeply congruent with one another, and that both of them have something to teach us about the dangers of the heresy of Docetism. Now, when Jesus marches into Jerusalem, when he is taken to be nailed to the hard wood of the cross, the category of Docetism doesn't exist. It's not going to show up for another, 100 or 150 years. But the mistake of seeing Jesus as something other than fully human still very much exists. And the mistake of seeing other people in general as something other than fully human exists. That's a mistake that is as old as humanity itself. Like Docetism, seeing Jesus and seeing our neighbor as something other than fully human frequently comes disguised as something virtuous or reverent or good. We think we're saying positive things about another person when we describe them in a way that isn't fully human. So if you've ever heard somebody talk about somebody with Down syndrome and say, oh, they're happy all the time, or they're like angels, well, that's positive, isn't it? That's a good thing to say about another person. Except a fully human person isn't happy all the time. A fully human person is not like an angel. We are not allowing that person to be fully human. There's something similar we can do with country of origin. So the Germans are efficient. The Italians are good lovers. The Filipinos are funny. The Canadians are nice, but sort of boring. Right? Well, what's wrong with any of this, right? These are all very positive things to say, except we've now moved an entire category of people. I don't know what the population of Germany is. Is it 50 or 80 million? That's an enormous number of people to say all have the same characteristics in nature. They're not fully human in nature. I'm drawing here on the work of the philosopher John Ralston Saul. And John Ralston Saul calls these sort of positive generalizations passive xenophobia. So it's not active insofar as there's no violence accompanying it, but we also aren't allowing the folks in the categories we're speaking to have the nuance that you and I have, the complexity that we have, the full humanity that you and I have. And Saul's argument is that it's a very short journey indeed from passive xenophobia to active xenophobia. Once we have decided that a category of people or a person is something other than fully human, it isn't that hard to decide, well, fully human, more than human can turn into less than human very easily. And it's not hard to visit violence on these folks. This is how we end up sterilizing folks with Down syndrome. It is how we end up doing incredible violence against the First Nations people of North America. It is how Ukraine gets invaded, right? There are vermin in Ukraine. This is the language that is used by Russia, by the invading country. This violence is therefore justified. And my hunch is that lining the roads as Jesus walks into Jerusalem are more than a few people who are not allowing the possibility that he is fully human. They've decided he is more than human. So he is this idealized king who is come to rescue Israel and to rescue it in the way that they expect a king to rescue it, which is to say via revolution, via violence. He is going to kick out Caesar in the most bloody and triumphant way. He's like Thor or Hercules. We have an expression when we think of someone as more than human, don't we? We call that putting them up on a pedestal. And the difficulty with putting people up on pedestals is when they disappoint you, when they don't turn out to be the kind of king that you want. They have a long way to fall off of that pedestal. You can hurt yourself if you fall while you're standing on the ground, but you're going to get hurt way more badly if you're standing on a pedestal. And if we turn our anger on the one who has disappointed us, and if they are more than human, then they don't really have feelings, do they? They can't really be hurt emotionally, spiritually, physically. When we turn our violence on them, we can turn that violence on them with good conscience. And I suspect this is what happens over the course of Holy Week. These folks who have made Jesus more than human, when he disappoints them, they make this short journey to less than human. To borrow a line from Nadia Bolz-Weber, it is not a long journey from hail him to nail him. It is not a long journey from palm to passion. I'm struck that somewhere along the way in church history and church tradition, we decided to create a symbol for the collision of Palm and Passion. So the text says that people are waving palm branches as Jesus walks down triumphantly into Jerusalem, and we do that, but we've also taken the palm branches and woven them into the cross. So here they are, both in one place, Palm and Passion. So remember the full humanity of Jesus. And remember the full humanity of your neighbor, lest we make the same mistake as the people who cheer, some of the people who cheer as Jesus makes his way into Jerusalem. It is so easy, once we've decided that someone is something other than fully human, to move from Palm to Passion, from hail him to nail him. It is so easy to be on a parade with Jesus, thinking that we are carrying palms, to look down and discover that we are carrying a hammer and nails as we march to the cross.